Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Going to talk a bit about what the fisheries we've been working on here at Cedar Lake through our fish surveys. To introduce, I'm Tom Becchio, the fisheries biologist for Northwest Indiana. Dan Carnahan's our statewide fisheries management supervisor. So any of the tough questions, he'll be able to answer if I can't. But to get right into it, so just to start off with a little background, I work for Indiana Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and so our mission is to enrich the quality of life for the present and future generations by balancing the biological, recreational, and economic benefits of Indiana's fish, wildlife, and their habitats. So that's the overarching thing for our division, but specifically as a fish biologist, I assist in the management of our fish resources and their habitat. So specifically, we do a lot of fish population surveys, which I know a lot of you guys have picked up coming in and have been looking at that. I'm going to present a little bit of those results, a little bit broader than the handout. The handouts are what we use for providing that information to our anglers. And so from these surveys, we can make stocking recommendations, regulation proposal, and then various other management activities. And if you didn't get a handout, a few more have been made, so I greatly appreciate it. So a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about tonight is the fish survey that we did last year, which is that main handout. Some of our past fish surveys did print all of those off because we have quite a few, but our most recent one on our hybrid striped bass. And then a lot of talk's been talked about a whole lake fish eradication. So just going to give a big, broad overview of what that all would incur if going down that route here or anywhere. Some other management alternatives that we're looking at following that survey, and then we'll be able to hopefully take any of your questions, discussion. Got a few people here that hopefully will be pretty knowledgeable about what's going on here at Cedar Lake to move forward. And so moving right on to our 2023 survey. Like I said, this is the handout, so if you can't see it or want more detail, it's in that packet. So last year, we did this general fish survey, where we go out and catch everything that we can that's in the lake, species-wise, number-wise. We do this with three methods. We use nighttime electrofishing, so if you live near the lake and you heard a boat with a generator, some people want dipping fish with nets. That better been us. If it was somebody else, then you need to make a phone call because no one else should be using electricity to catch fish except for DNR or a special permit, which there's really no one else doing it in the state. So we use electrofishing. We also use gill nets, which we set offshore, and that collects a lot of our open water fish, our shad, catfish, suckers, stuff like that. And then we also use trap nets, which are set along shore. We have buoys on them. It's a trap, and fish that come near shore, mostly our panfish, get collected in that style of trap. So overall at Cedar Lake, we caught almost 3,400 species in all our effort that we did, and that represented 22 different species. So pretty darn high on species diversity for Cedar Lake. Unfortunately, white perch, not too many lakes around have white perch, which is good, but not many do. Unfortunately, Cedar Lake has an abundant white perch population. It makes up the majority of our catch, and it has for many years since they've been introduced. The white perch can be valuable to anglers if they get big enough. Unfortunately, the ones that we got this past go-around, wasn't much size to them. Most of them were less than 7 inches, and it's really hard to get a fillet off that small of a fish. And other lakes that we have, Wolf Lake, just a little bit north of here, it actually has white perch up to 12 inches. And there are people that don't necessarily target them, but when they do catch them, keep them for the cooler and enjoy them. So the next most abundant species was gizzard shad. Gizzard shad, you're very unlikely to catch that hook and line. They feed on plankton, little bugs in the water. So most people, if they're going to catch them, they catch them accidentally by snagging. So the reason why gizzard shad are an issue is they grow really fast. They consume a lot of the same prey items as our small bass and bluegill, but they grow ridiculously fast and they spawn really early. So they can be a big problem in many of our lakes Frankly, 144 isn't that big of a problem for Cedar Lake. We have lakes that will have 600-700 and the same amount of effort. So the gizzard shad numbers, while they are abundant, aren't super bad, but they do cause those food web effects that impact our desirable sport fish. The other kind of nuisance fish to mention is also the common carp. They cause impacts because they root around in vegetation, dislodge it, uproot, and keep the sediment stirred up and moving. Not super high abundance, but still something undesirable for Cedar Lake. So we've talked about a lot of the undesirable things in Cedar Lake. So some of the good things, Cedar Lake's actually one of the best catfish populations that we have in northwest Indiana, if not northern Indiana. It's got a great channel catfish population. Numbers are really good. The size of fish, just a big, nice, broad size range of fish. In the packet, it also has what we age those fish as. We aged them from 1 to 15 years old, and the growth looks pretty good. Pretty much average growths, which is a good thing, considering all the white perch that are out there. And we also looked at our growth for all our sport fish populations as well, our bass, bluegill, crappies. Overall, Cedar Lake, the growth was average, nothing that stood out as an issue. Normally, our glacial lakes will have more abundant bluegill. That's normally our top collected species. But they're really limited on the habitat at Cedar Lake. There's really not any submerged aquatic vegetation, and they really need that to hide from the predators to grow up and do their thing and create an abundant panfish population. Similarly with the bass. They need that vegetation to hide in and grow and move around. Without that vegetation, they're pretty well open to our predators. And we collected a variety of other sport fish that anglers go after: hybrid striped bass or wipers that we stock, crappies, walleyes. Those are the primary ones that are targeted by anglers. So that's a real quick overview of last year's survey, what we were out there and what we caught. And so how does that compare to our past surveys that we've done? So we have a variety of just general fish surveys. And this isn't even all of them. This is just going back to a decent number. And so these are just general fish collections. We're out there collecting everything, seeing what populations are looking like. As you can see, since the mid-90s, there's a lot of white perch, and they've been the dominant species in the lake. It has changed the fish assemblage a bit here and there. There's fewer carp by overall number. So one thing I forgot to mention to start, this is a percent catch. So the reason why we look at percent catch, not raw numbers, is it equalizes a lot of that catch based on our sampling effort. We've had variable sampling effort across our surveys, and so if we look at percent catch, it evens the board a little bit better on what the populations are doing. So back to white perch being in, the common carp numbers have dropped, which is a good thing because they will root around and dislodge a lot of sediment and impact some water quality. Crappie numbers they've dropped out, unfortunately, too, with white perch. There are some crappies out there, but it's not nearly as high as it had been in the past. But like I said, the big thing that has increased are channel catfish. They have increased since the white perch have been in there. Likely that they're eating a lot of white perch because there's an abundant prey source there. The one odd blip on that other category in 1987, for whatever reason, there was a lot of yellow perch that was collected that year, but that was the only time that they were ever collected. That's why that category is a little off, a little weird looking. And so that's just kind of the overall general fish survey and how it compares over time. White perch are pretty dominant in the lake, and they will likely continue to be until a big predator really consumes those, knocks them back. So the one thing that we do is we've been annually stocking hybrid straight bass for wipers for quite a few years. I have a graph here in a little bit for how long we've been stocking wipers. And so we go out and evaluate these wiper stockings just to make sure our stockings are working fish are growing, and we're not just wasting our money. Because our hatcheries are tapped out. We can't grow any more fish. We're maximized there, so any changes in our stocking strategies, it influences all our state fisheries on what we're doing. And so we need to make sure we're getting fish out of our hatchery production, and so we do these surveys. The one thing to note on the catch rate on this one is that's a very comparable number because we're running the same type of nets in almost identical locations, so we can look at that trends over time. And overall, we're catching a lot of wipers. They're doing really well out here. They're growing very big. We got a 28-inch individual in 2020, which is a really big wiper for cedar, as well as statewide. We rarely catch any of those fish in our surveys. So they're definitely eating well, and they're growing fast. I mean, in that survey, we looked at the growth, and they're doing well. Like I said, we annually stock these at 10 an acre, so 7,810 fish. They're stocked in the spring, so just about 1.5 inch average. And they avoid that predation and do grow and become a desirable predator species, and anglers do target them in many locations. And then the other thing we've collected in our hybrid straight bass surveys are walleyes. They're a little bit more vulnerable in the fall, moving around, so that's why we get more walleyes in the fall than we do in our general surveys. And we've also collected muskies. So the 2020 survey, we collected 21 walleyes, a broader size distribution, 15 to 26 inch individuals. So with the walleyes and muskie, there's been no permitted state stockings on the lake, and there's really no habitat for those fish to reproduce, so they're coming from somewhere. Not saying that they're bad, but we do like to know what's going in our lakes. We do allow stocking permits, and we would permit stockings. And the big reason why we want to know what's going in our lake is so they're a good genetic source, as well as they're coming from a reputable location. White perch came in here from somewhere. Was it an accidental or intentional stocking? Don't know, but it's possible stuff gets mixed in if you're not using a reputable source. So we do like to know, and we do permit stockings to occur. 2009 is the last time we got any muskies out here. They were all pretty much the same size, so likely from the same stocking source at that time. And so that's, again, an overview. We have quite a few other targeted surveys that we've done on the hybrid straight bass. That's the primary targeted survey that we've done where it's not a general survey. But this is just a quick highlight of the most recent one that had some pretty good results. And so, excuse me. So getting into what it would mean for whole lake fish eradication. This isn't just a Cedar Lake specific example. It's overall, if anything would go into a whole fish eradication, there's a lot of factors that go into it. First off, it's the most extreme management action that can be undertaken. Killing off a whole lake, restocking, that's a lot to do. And so we have a lot of internal and external components that go into it. Internally, we need to have the support and funding from our division and DNR all the way up the chain to make sure that this is the best use for state time and resources. But that doesn't exclude any of the local input or angler input on a renovation. So we will, if going down this route for any renovation that we've done throughout the state, it takes multiple years of meetings and figuring out what's the best case to do. And so with that, we do public meetings. Like I said, this isn't a meeting that we're going to decide yes or no or anything on a renovation. It's a overview of what would occur. And so we have public meetings, talk to the people, find out what they want. We go out and talk directly to anglers that don't necessarily come to meetings. Are you happy with fishing or not happy? And the other good thing, if talking to anglers, we get a baseline of where we're at the current stage. Are we catching fish? Are we not catching fish? and then if we do a renovation or not do a renovation, we can come back in several years, repeat that angler survey, and see where the fishery is shaking out. So the rest of this part of the slide is just kind of the background steps of if we were to move forward with a renovation, what all has to occur, mostly internally from our side. But first we have to obtain the necessary permits. They do have timelines on how long they can be, so you got to apply for them at a certain time so they don't expire on you. But that's the easiest part of the whole process, is writing those permits. Ramping up fish production for restocking is a huge undertaking from our hatcheries. As I mentioned, we're going at full capacity, so any change in that, in our growth at hatcheries, whether it's for more bluegill or bass for a renovation project, or trying to get more walleyes or catfish or muskies or hybrid straight bass, or any of those, all our pond space is taken, so it's a big trade-off, and that trade-off is a statewide trade-off, so we have to work with all the other biologists, all the other lakes, in figuring out what is the best for our statewide production to meet our goals.
Does this require you having the lake dredged prior to you doing that?
It would be a good thing, but in other renovations that we've done statewide, dredging wasn't a factor in it. Some other lakes, they suffered from each lake's kind of an individual example. So I can go through the process in general, but each lake's a case by case. Like we had another lake in southern Indiana, had some real poor fish population stuff, but they were able to draw down the lake about 10 feet. And so that was a big factor in being able to feasibly do a renovation there. But the dredging for here it would be very good to have that done
before we restock.
Before anything goes forward, because we're not going to put a lot of fish in while the lake's continuing getting churned up.
Right.
And the other thing with the dredging, that's removing a lot of that sediment and nutrients, which will hopefully benefit some plant growth, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute.
And we don't really have the depth in this lake to make it go down anymore, correct? It's pretty shallow. It's a
very shallow lake, and I mean, you can only go, with permits, you can only go as far as, there's a baseline number. You can only go that deep. You can't make this 18-foot deep lake 70 feet. One, you're never going to pay for it because that'd be ridiculous. And two, that's just not what the lake's going to do. Lakes, unfortunately, are filling in at all times. Eventually, they'll become dry ground. I mean, from a big bowl, 100-foot deep lake to a bog, how long does it take? Thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Some lakes go a little bit quicker. But that's just a big synopsis, super long, crazy picture type of thing.
But this lake is a clay kettle lake that was formed by the glaciers.
Yep.
And we had a professor tell us at a lake enhancement meeting that there are no springs in this lake. That if you feel like a spring in that water, it was because of wind current. And the deepest spot out there is a small pocket, as you can see on that map over there, of 16 feet.
Yeah, it's a very shallow lake. And a lot of that dredging, though, is removing some of the accumulated sediment and keeping it back to that clay basin, because with permits, we wouldn't let go into the clay basin, is what I understand. So that does bring me to the plan of if a treatment was to go on. We have a lake map. We would update our lake map to make sure we know an accurate volume of the lake, because that impacts how much product that we need to put on to remove the fish. And in addition to the lake, all the water that's coming into the lake would need to be treated. If there's not necessarily a spring, but just a drainage ditch or an outflow from a house or something that's keeping fresh water, if a few fish get in there, like the white perch or carp, find that little pocket that's not treated, in an area without any fish in it, they're going to colonize it ridiculously fast, and we could end up actually with a worse case than when we started. So there's ton of planning and making sure that every bit of water is treated, and if there's runoff coming in, make sure that we have the appropriate way to treat any of that runoff coming in. That example I was saying where we lowered that lake, we had crews going all the way, walking ditches and creeks all the way through the watershed to where we ran out of water to make sure every little pocket of water that was standing there was treated to make sure no fish were coming back in. And so it's a big undertaking from just the logistics of planning that. And then we have Lake Dale just directly downstream. I know we have the dam on the lake, but in extreme flood events or if fish get moved up from below the dam to the top of the lake, that's a concern as well. So looking into Lake Dale a little bit as well on potential treatment. And I know it's like pretty unfeasible, but if we were able to remove water, like we were saying, that had a dam, so they were able to open that control structure and let water out. Cedar Lake, again, that probably happened there, but if there was a way to lower that water to get water out of the wetlands, it would make treatment a little more feasible, but very unlikely. So the other big thing with the fish eradication is the product that's used. The product's called rotenone. It is an EPA-registered fish toxicant, restricted use pesticide, meaning that you have to have a Category 5 pesticide license from the Indiana State Chemist to apply it, buy it, just short of looking at it. It is the only fish toxicant that is registered as a fish toxicant in the state and the U.S. And to get a complete kill, we need to get 3 parts per million. That's the kill off carp level. You can do very low doses and knock it back shad, but you don't kill everything, and they will come back. And so for Cedar Lake, with our preliminary depth map and volume, it's about 7,000 gallons of product. It would be the largest current renovation or recent renovation that we have in the state. That lake that we lowered, we put down a few hundred gallons on that body of water, nowhere near the 7,000 gallons that we need.
While you're on this topic, I was just hoping to interject a quick question. With all the dredging discussions going on, when and where and how, when you're talking about putting a chemical into the lake, would it make sense to do that prior to finishing the dredging so that with the dredging could suck out any residue of that left out? Could the jobs coincide with each other, in other words?
So this product, it's a liquid product, and it breaks down actually fairly quickly. Originally it was found as a plant root derivative, and it's manufactured now, but it would not be best to do it with the dredging because it does bind a little bit with the sediment, and so it would lose toxicity. It also loses its toxicity when it's exposed to the sun and heat.
So it's basically like what you put in your pool to kill algae?
Essentially, yes. I mean, you put it in there. If we put it in the summer, it'll mix in the water column. So if there's a thermocline, which there isn't on Cedar Lake because it's so shallow, but in a lake that has a thermocline so that water doesn't mix from top to bottom, you can apply it on the top level of that water body and reduce the amount of treatment because it'll go through that column, but it won't mix. And so if you apply it in the summer, it'll degrade within a day or two. We typically do renovations in the fall when the water's cooler, so we can get a little bit longer of a cook time. It keeps that product active in the water column for several days to make sure that the toxicity is there. Nothing can, like my example of fish finding a drain tile, they don't find that quite as quick.
How do you get that out of how do you get it out?
The rotenone, it just breaks down naturally and it becomes non-detectable within several days.
We did a kill here years ago, rotenone kill in Cedar Lake and Lake Dale. It was ineffective, actually.
It was in 1966.
It was ineffective for a lot of reasons, and it would be ineffective again if you put here in Cedar Lake.
So
it would be a waste of money and time. Another question I have real quick, the 53 geological survey in the 50s had Cedar Lake's water depth at 35 feet. And that was a fact, that was true. Why did we not, this is what I don't understand, why did we not use a chemical dredge on this lake to to get the 3 basins where the sediment would be there, any organic sediment which might have been taken off with that enzyme treatment rather than the dredging treatment we're going to be doing with the thing. I mean, it would seem more likely to take off the, 6 or 8 feet of sediment that's there with the chemical dredging, because most of us, with any sense, realize that below 8 feet, there's nothing to suspend. Most of that suspension out there is unfortunately from the old ice house days, and is something that isn't going to rot away. It's called sawdust, it's cedar sawdust. That's why Cedar Lake is no longer Cedar Lake. They use all that cedar sawdust, people don't realize, for the ice houses, for the packing around the ice. Cedar Lake Handle Factory, one of their big byproducts was just handles. They sold a lot of sawdust to those ice houses, and unfortunately, when the ice houses went, the sawdust stayed. I know because I got tons of it on my place. It looks like mud, it looks black, your hand goes in, comes out clean, I can put it on the ground, and an hour later, light it on fire. It's all cedar sawdust. It isn't going to rot, and that is the problem with the wind and the boat traffic. And if we had that, you all know probably, I think, that we could get a depth of 8 feet or so, that stuff is just going to suspend after 8 feet. It'll suspend from 4 to 6 feet. But if we can get that water in those deep holes where it was 35 feet deep in the 50s, and it was, we could get that stuff to drop into those holes and settle and rock on down there, and we'd have less suspension. We'd also have a weed growth, which we had until not too many years ago, and that weed growth would solidify that the lake bottom and stop some of that stuff from suspending anyways. If we could get that water clear enough, I think by using a chemical dredge, we'd save ourselves some money in the long run. I think that the cost is about the same. We did a test project on my place, and we got 18 inches just in a few months in the summertime of that sediment that was organic and could be destroyed with that. It's like you guys know what it is. It's like using a grease trap enzyme. It's a similar type product which would cause that stuff to be an inert gas as it dissolves. It wouldn't harm or damage anything, fish life or anything. And I think that our suspension problems would be a lot faster and more quickly solved with that chemical dredging, stirring up the bottom.
So I'm not a dredging expert. I know you guys have had lots of meetings on that, so I'm not even gonna try to comment on any of that type of stuff, because that's just well beyond what I do.
We're talking about the road now. I went through that road now deal there, and
right.
It was an interesting thing because it killed anything we wanted to keep alive in Cedar Lake. So some of the native fish which will never come back, which were there. I realized people care about garfish or buffalo or the rest of that, but those were native fish. Cedar Lake had a very large northern population at one time due to there's plenty of weeds that they spawned in the marsh and during Cedar Lake, and the main forage for those northerns in those days was white crappies. That's what they ate. We've kind of done away with most of the white crappies. We've got 4 kinds of crappies in this lake right now with the hybrids. Black nose, blacks, whites, and what I call a mahogany crappie. It's the same thing as a white and black crappie combo. The population is pretty high. I think that you guys, your surveys, some of that survey is not accurate because of the water table at the time where the fish are when you're trying to survey it. I think all of us that fish here know we've got some pretty large populations of crappies there. Yes, a very large population of walleye. The northerns are gone, obviously. Bluegills are never a big deal in the lake anyways, but bullheads, there's a few, I guess catfish were never in the lake originally, but were put in after that float zone kill, along with the white. In fact, I was one of the guys that originally stocked those. 2 of us stocked the original white bass in that lake because that year the hatcheries lost their fish. So I know Guy Carlson with the Mott State Bank and I went half and half and put those original hybrids in this lake. And it turned out, but it didn't turn out like we thought it would. One thing you didn't address in here, I think that when you're talking with these shad and these white perch and that's a main forage fish for crappies and some of the other fish that are feeding and growing in this lake.
Well, they are when they're very young and just hatched out. A shad will be that big at the end of the season.
You find 7-inch white perches in the mouth and the gut of these big crappies in this lake. Not uncommon at all for those of us that fish this lake.
Yeah.
Three of my 15-inch crappie had 2 and 3 inch white perch.
Well, I don't disagree at all. I'm saying, I was talking more in shad. Shad are
Yeah,
going
well,
real
they die off every couple of years.
Not all of them, unfortunately, but yes, a lot of them do.
Hey, can we let him finish the presentation and then do questions afterwards?
Yeah.
He's probably gonna talk about a lot of these during the presentation, and then we can get through this, then we'll have a big question time afterwards.
Alright.
Thanks.
And, but yeah, with that renovation that was back in the 60s, even the notes that we had on the fish, or the survey report said it was unsuccessful, obviously. I mean, it just didn't work, and so we're not willing to set ourselves up for another failed
They didn't do the
renovation.
swamp when they killed it the last time. They didn't do the swamp, they didn't do the Pinecrest ditch either.
So, and that's definitely a big issue, and that's what, if we are going down this road, we're gonna invest a lot of time to make sure we're doing it right. But the big thing, probably read it by now, Rotenon's not available. It's undergoing EPA re-registration, and so it's not being produced, and no idea if it's even gonna be produced again, because it's the study that they need done for it is very expensive, and the company that produces Rotenon doesn't want to pay for it. So, right now, we have no fish toxicant for any project in the U.S., which is actually very scary. I know we're very concerned about Cedar Lake, but there's a lot of other scary fish throughout the U.S., and if they get into some locations, we have no way to control those. So that's, as a fish biologist, and looking at that big picture, that's pretty scary that we don't have that tool. So, like I said, this is, for Cedar Lake, we've reduced any of the white perch, common carp, gizzard shad, which is great, but we'd also lose a lot of those species that are in the lake, because our state hatcheries we'll only stock about 7 different sport fish, and like you mentioned, we lost gar, buffalo, northern pike. Those fish are not produced and likely won't come
One
back.
thing I think that people don't realize and remember about Cedar Lake, we had 2 kinds of perch in that lake. Originally in the 50s, the Cedar Lake Fish and Game Club, they were stocking trying to catch Cedar Lake, and they had a wheat bed and that going on. And the perch that were there were amazingly large perch, and I realized that we had a big yellow perch deal going on there. And I remember that year you're talking about, you could catch yellow perch on the Gold Coast that year. For some reason, there were so many yellow perch, Cedar Lake was like, every other fish was a yellow perch, they just disappeared. And I think some of that was found in the fact that the white perch was munching down on those 7-inch white perch pretty rapidly, I mean yellow perch pretty rapidly. But the fact is that I don't know why they didn't discuss, even though perch are very slow-growing fish, the fact that there were, 12 and 13 and 14 inch perch in this lake by the thousands was an amazing thing. We never did look at putting them back in here. I wonder why.
Because there's no habitat left. They're similar to bass bluegill. They need some weeds to hide in to live and evade predation. A lot of it revolves around not having any plant growth in the lake. And so with the dredging, potential alum treatment, fish eradication, that water clarity should improve. We should get plants returning to the lake, and that's the big key to getting a lot of these desirable sport fish back. But, as we've mentioned, Cedar Lake's pretty darn shallow, and if we get light penetrating at just a couple feet, vegetation will occupy a lot of that shallow zone, and will make traveling could be pretty difficult. Because unfortunately, one of the big quick colonizing plants we have is Eurasian water milfoil. It's non-native, but it grows really fast, really aggressive. They'll come off the bottom and form mats in just a couple foot of water. And frankly, everyone hates milfoil, even anglers, because it's self-sufficient.
About the weed growth. Is the fact possibly that seeds and spores from native plants and things that were in this lake at one time are still there, and with the light, that those things will come back?
It's very possible.
We had a lot of desirable weed growth in the lake at one time. The one of them is that is a sago pondweed was a very prevalent thing in Cedar Lake at one time. We all know that's the #1 waterfowl food in North America, and that disappeared. In fact, a few years ago, it was still there. It's gone. But If those spores and seeds are still in the bottom, in that sediment, in that mud, and that they will hatch, with enough light penetration, those weeds will come back. We don't have to worry about the invasive species like the milfoil.
The milfoil will take out sago instantly.
Yeah.
The sago might start coming in, but there's milfoil and it will come in potentially come in. Yes, the sago could come in, other natives, or we could have no plants if we don't get the light penetration and all that seedbed's dead.
Absolutely correct. That's why I'm wondering why we don't maybe consider the fact that we could probably do a faster job of getting light penetration and getting some depth in those three basins where the bottom is at 35 feet of rock hard, by the way, where that sediment is going. I understand that a lot of that enzyme it is not going to take care of any wash, any erosion that's occurred in the lake, or that dirt and stuff that doesn't dissolve or not eaten up by an enzyme. But we do have a lot of, I know it'll deal with the solid situation and some of that stuff that's got in the lake. And I think that if we get ourselves a few feet, another 4 feet there, our light penetration and the sediment of this will be a better situation.
Yeah, so one of the things we do monitor in our surveys is that light penetration. We use what's called a Secchi disc. It's just a white and black. We drop it down. It's really poor, as you can imagine. I mean, everyone's been on
Except for the
lake.
spring and the fall, where you see the bottom of every place in Cedar Lake, so the wind comes up, you know.
Right, yeah, and it's...
Bone clear, you know, everybody knows that part.
Yeah, and the other thing with that time of year is a lot of that plankton, since it's cold, is not growing, it's dropped out. And so in addition to any sediment movement, we don't have that plankton growth that we do, like we do in the summer. But to get back to, I mean, for sport fish, if we did the renovation, we would come in with about 7 different species of sport fish. We'd reduce diversity, but a concern is the potential for those other fish that are not desirable or to come back in. And so a little bit about some of the concerns with doing a fish eradication. As we kind of mentioned, I mean, that's a low likelihood of success. There's a lot of different spots to treat that last the 60s renovation didn't hit a lot of those key spots. Want to make sure we hit them, but do we miss any, or does something get connected later? It's a big concern. Carp are really difficult to kill. Like I said, we got to get 3 parts per million of rope gnome. If we don't get there, carp are going to live, and they're pretty adaptable to get through these rope gnome projects. And we'll have to treat aerially over some of these wetlands, and that's one of the concerns and likelihood of the EPA re-registration is that there's going to be a lot stricter herbicide use, which we don't know what that's going to be if that label comes out, and so that's a concern.
So basically, you can't get a hold of the stuff that's going to do this, correct? And you have no fish for at least 5 years if you do it, and if you get the chemical.
If we killed it off,
right,
fishing would be gone for at least 5 years, just the general fishing, okay, 7 to 10 years before you're even getting like.
However, if we dredge it properly, that will give us more depth and more opportunity for the plants to grow and the fish to rejuvenate, correct?
It's a good point. You know, the fastest way to do that fishery thing is to clear the water up.
So
the fastest way to clear the water up is to get that table to where that sediment stays below that 8-foot level. And the fastest way to do that would be to use the enzyme treatment in the deep holes there and get that water depth down rapidly.
So, yeah, while I'm concerned and interested in the dredging stuff, I focus much more on the water at what the current condition is, not so much on how the community's going about getting that condition, right, where we're at that time. So, yeah, fishing's going to be non-existent. It's going to take us a long time to restock because we just don't have that many fish to get what we need to get back in there. And so, yeah, everything combining together is how that fishery and just water use is going to come back. And like I said, I deal with the current situations and not necessarily the dredging aspect. I had heard the early discussions on the dredging, but I was just concerned on, is it going to negatively are we gonna have a big massive fish kill that we didn't induce? And so that's the big concern from my standpoint of the what ifs, on what would occur there.
But naturally, it would be okay to dredge it and they have to kind of like help increase the fish, correct? Without killing them all?
If we can get the plant life back, that will definitely change the fish community out there.
And we need more depth for that.
Not necessarily, we just need the water clarity.
Okay.
So whatever the clarity is,
Cedar Lake compared to all these other lakes, do you feel like there's a need to kill these fish? Don't you think that's a giant waste of a natural resource?
it's an extreme, management action with a very low likelihood of success.
And then also, with all these watersheds being connected, you would have to be almost all the way to Wolf Lake and past Lake Dale.
Correct.
Okay, so there's no money or resource for that, let alone manpower.
So,
There's a lot of variables that are not working in the favor, but I mean, if we had unlimited time and resources, would it work? Probably not. It's
No,
too big of an
the other
This is like a
thing is
moot
this.
point then, right?
It doesn't matter, Wolf Lake all the way past Shaver Lake, every one of these lakes in this portion of Indiana are the same color regardless of depth, regardless of weed growth, the clarity. I know, I fished every one of them. Many hours, 40, 50 hours a week, okay? They're all the same color. It's all basically one water body. So I don't see where you guys even with weed coming back, I don't see where you think you're gonna get the clarity. None of the other lakes have it.
So we'll get better clarity. Right now, the clarity is so poor. The other lakes,
Cedar Lake is gonna be the oddball?
no, I'm not saying it's gonna turn crystal clear and be the best fishing lake in Indiana. It could be better if we get some vegetation, especially for bass and bluegill.
It's already the
But-
best fishing
Yeah.
lake.
Yeah.
You're the only one that doesn't know it.
How about some artificial structure?
That is potential. I mean, so for artificial structure, that permit has to be start at the local level. To get that buy-in. What?
Have you guys affiliated the cost to this project at all,
For the road known?
or the whole project?
How can they do that? They don't even know if they can get the product.
Well,
It's like,
what
why are you
the,
wasting everyone's time here?
So-
People are taking off work about a meeting that you can't even get a product to.
so the meeting was to discuss what we're going for,
Discuss the
what we did
product,
last
We don't
year.
know if it will ever be produced.
Correct, don't know. And last year's price tag on road known was over $1 million for this project. So,
You know,
and with a low likelihood of success, it's probably not gonna go on.
The fastest way to get that lake better is to cause a weed growth and a water clarity. I think that could be done a lot less expensively than the road and project. Obviously, you know that. You know, also, one thing we forgot to mention, carp have the biggest brain of any freshwater fish, they ain't dumb. So they ain't gonna go any place that the water isn't gonna have time.
And that probably.
I witnessed that myself. But point being is, again, if we could talk about getting away some of that silt suspension more rapidly than.
That's gonna be a different meeting than this one.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
So, what we're looking, for the current conditions, what we're looking at is increasing that hybrid striped bass stocking to try to utilize some of those gizzard shad and white perch and try to get a little bit more predation for some of the desirable sport fish. We've done that in the past. I mean, this is going back through time of our hybrid striped bass stocking numbers, fish per acre. Again, that's going to be balancing with our other statewide hatchery needs. But the wipers, we can generally come by. Some of the other fish, like walleye or hybrid walleye, they're a lot harder to come by because we're really tapped out on that resource. Yes, they grow and live in the lake, but there's some other concerns that we have for utilizing those fish up here. Then the other thing we get a lot on our renovation projects are why not stock bass, bluegill, or crappie? One, for Cedar Lake, limited habitat, and two, nationwide, the stockings, especially of bass, they typically don't work. There are very, very few locations that it works in and actually produces something out of that fishery for the amount of fish that are stocked.
Northern pike. It's like you used to have a regular reproduction of northern pike. Kill them off they put 28, the state of Indiana put 28 northern pike in this lake since 1966. That would help out doing that, taking care of some white perch and shad quite a bit. And the walleye, I think I fish quite a bit. I think they've actually reproduced in here. I don't know how you get 10-inch fish. I don't know any fisherman that would, break a law, bring 10-inch fish from another lake to put in here. But I've caught walleye from 6 inches all the way, I caught a 24-inch.
Well, there's definitely good walleyes, and there's a lot of hatcheries that supply
I was looking at the stockings for Willow Slough. They put 194,000 the last time they drained the northern pike.
Correct.
We can't get maybe a few 100,000 or a
So,
couple hundred, maybe?
They
will reproduce.
So we don't grow northern pike anymore. The fish for Willow Slough, we bartered from Illinois, and Willow Slough is not getting northern pike after this past renovation.
I got the stockings all the way back to 1900. This lake's been so neglected. I don't know.
It's Lake County.
Yeah, it's Lake County. So much money up northeast. They're stocking 70-acre lakes with walleye along northeast borderline.
So I deal here with
Northern
14 counties here in northwest Indiana. So I'm trying to balance the resource over here. I know there's a lot of lakes in northeast that get a lot of stocking as well.
This used to be the best crappie lake in the 60s, more crappie in this lake than any other lake in the state, till DNR came in, seined it, and took them down to Willow Slough. They seined it off the spawning beds, and since then it's been downhill.
No, it's really great. We're catching 16-inch crappie.
On the big ones, I'm talking about a bunch.
Well, you can go out and catch a limit of 12-inch crappies
Well,
now.
the bucket isn't what it was, like Jim said, but
The numbers ain't, but the
also
quality
the
is.
dynamic has changed. So where all these crappies used to run in and spawn, all these places are silted in. Pinecrest Ditch, North Point Ditch, the ditch down from the dam, Old Tulip Harbor. Okay, so the difference is this. Those people can't get access to catch very many of those fish. So those fish have turned to staying out in the lake and spawning. Now, if you fish the lake, you have a different opinion of that, regardless of what your survey says. It's just the same thing with the largemouth bass. Your survey says we don't have crap for largemouth bass. Well,
Our pictures show otherwise.
yeah, we have proof of that. And it will rival any lake in the state for a 5-fish limit at the right time of year.
And so that is a summer survey. It is not specifically targeting largemouth bass. I agree, there's definitely more largemouth bass than we collected. For a largemouth bass survey, we go in there this time of year, well, mid-April, when they're up near shallow, very, very vulnerable for our sampling methods, and that's when we do our largemouth bass surveys.
Where at on the lake do you do it?
We do it spread randomly throughout the lake so we can get a representative sample. We're not going into the most ideal habitat. What's that?
You got a map?
I don't have it. So I make the map before we go out. So what I do is I'll take the whole map, I'll start at the boat ramp and do quarter-mile sections. Go all the way around the lake, number those sections, and then I go into a number generator and go with what sections that we go to. The reason for that is, that way we can look at that information at a statewide level. If I just go into the best spots on Cedar Lake, all that tells me about is the best spots on Cedar Lake, and it doesn't tell me anything into our statewide management. There's 6 fish management districts in Indiana. It's not a lot, so we got to get around and make our data count, and so we have to have that random and strategically, so we can look at these things big picture. What I love to get into Cedar Lake and hit it hard, get a lot of great information. Yes, and it's same with our hatcheries, it's neglecting other resources. Cedar Lake's one of the few lakes in northern Indiana that we stock wipers in, good or bad. It is a management tool that we use up here. Many of the other lakes we stock nothing in. Other lakes don't need supplemental stocking as well. So it's just trying to broaden our resources and try to manage for a variety of people.
Tom, is there a way that we could locally support financially a restocking perhaps before you talk about the walleye?
Yeah, so we have a stocking permit. It's very inexpensive, $10. We raised the price. It used to be $5. I think it's $10. Basically, if you go through a commercial about a month before you want to stock, you go through a commercial fish supplier, which we have lists of those. Yeah, and you get in touch with me, or you send that permit in and say, hey, I want to stock 2,000, 5,100 walleyes. You go through that permit process, and most likely we will approve that. Big thing is making sure those fish are disease-free and nothing random is with those. We do look at to make sure it's going to be a compatible fish for the basin. We're not going to let you stock Chinook salmon or something crazy in the lake, something real weird. It's got to be something that's, if something's already in the lake and needs a boost, even in the past with pike, we'd approve of pike stocking and go with that. And somebody mentioned about putting fish habitats in. That's a lot of, unless you do that at the right location and big enough scale, those are aggregation types of structures. They're good to fish from, but don't necessarily make more fish. But they can be approved, and we do have a permit process to go through those. And like I was getting at, that's a locally driven initiative, and I can help with some of the locations, but it would be getting with the town to get those, because the public notice has to go to residents that it impacts. And there's a bit of legwork to getting that done. The structure putting in is easy, the legwork's the difficult part, but it could be possible.
There'd be plenty of volunteers.
What about
That would be-
spatter dock?
What's that?
If we're having problems with vegetation growth, but the only weeds or vegetation we have in the lake is spatter dock,
Right.
why don't we put more spatter dock in?
So the carp will root that up a little bit, very little bit, but the big thing is the lake's so developed, most people don't want spatter dock in front of their house. And so if you look at where the spatter dock is now, it's mostly undeveloped shorelines, and that's what we see on most of our lakes. There is a permit process on treating that spatter dock, not necessarily to your other lakes, but over time, it tends to get dropped out because people want that big, nice, open-looking lake. And the more homes you have on a lake, the less spatter dock you typically have. And
Spatter
even they don't
dock
traffic
has
come in.
contains about 90% of the population of fish we have.
If not more, at least for the desirable sport fish on.
So even if we doubled that, that would double our fish.
And that's the
We
key.
couldn't go in front of some of these either lake town parks where town park and have spatter dock put in.
Have to work with the town on that. I mean, I can definitely assist with some of that parts of the project, but like I said, same as the habitat.
But I mean, you agree that that would be a good thing for the lake?
Yes. And like the crappies,
However, not for the
that's.
residents that live on the lake.
What's that?
I said, however, not for the residents that live on the lake, it wouldn't be the greatest thing. Because it's not,
Correct. But it's, if you can live with a patch the size of half the chairs here and there throughout the lake, that's still gonna produce a lot of benefits. The other benefit that that spatter dock produces for many of the residents, it's gonna drop that wave energy, and so beat up your seawall less, and provide some habitat.
Some stabilization for the
Stabilization, yes. And there's other places in addition to spatter dock, but spatter dock's super hardy and really easy to get established. Spatter dock isn't a
it
bad.
takes a little work to get this lake back to where it needs to be.
And a lot of these
You
initiatives
gotta
are
kill
locally
off
driven.
the entire lake.
Correct. And like the fish habitat, the spatter dock, that's a locally driven initiative. I have other lakes that I deal with, they have a lake council that they're putting out pamphlets and getting people, and a lot of it's not even money. It's just getting the acceptance to the idea of something different,
Okay.
of having patches of spatter dock or areas that are more natural or native.
How did we go from zero to the second most abundant fish? It all started about when they started,
So,
hybrids in.
what I read is the hybrids were after the white perch, but anyway, how do you go from zero white perch to super abundant?
Yes.
Because that's what white perch do. They are extremely abundant. They reproduce really quick, earlier than other species, so they have that advantage to getting out ahead of the food resources before your bluegill, crappie, bass. And so they exploit that resource, and they grow really quick, and they produce a lot of eggs that survive. The bluegills and bass, produce a fair amount of eggs, but they don't survive nearly as well as white perch.
But that's almost the same scenario like Lake Michigan and the Goby, you know? The Great Lakes got the Goby and they're doomed, you know, that was just the tail of it.
Right.
Okay,
And any new invader is gonna shoot up, they're gonna come back down and stabilize a little bit more.
because when something becomes the most abundant thing in the food chain, that's what they all turn to eating, just like the smallmouth and everything did on Lake Michigan. That's exactly what has happened here. Every fish in this lake eats that white perch, and that's why they're big. They have a high-quality protein source that's very abundant. And they have managed to knock that population down, even though your survey says it is high. It's not what it was 10 years ago.
Agreed. It is definitely knocked down. Like Wolf Lake I mentioned, it had a very abundant white perch. The last surveys that we did out there, it wasn't as abundant, but the size was better. So they were actually able to get a little bit bigger and desirable for people to eat. And that's, I do think that's for Cedar Lake. It's on the downhill of that initial abundance. A lot of stuff's out there eating them. They figured out how to eat it. They don't take over quite as heavily.
As far as the yellow
but it's
perch
so-
thing went too, that became, for a while there, a non-existent fish. If you go back through surveys that I wish I would have brought with me, at one time, they became the most abundant fish caught in the lake and on your survey.
Yes.
What got rid of those yellow perch I'm talking about, were the wipers. When they put the wipers in, they wiped them out. And you couldn't catch a wiper in this lake unless you were using a yellow perch colored bait. Okay, we ran tournaments on it and derbies on it, enough. You know, we sold thousands of dollars worth of yellow perch lures. After those wipers were in there a couple of years, that was it. Those perch were gone. So that's the answer to that question right there.
And they won't really come back without, I mean, the spatter duck they'll spawn on, but that's pretty limited habitat, and then they need something, white perch is a nice shaped body for everything to eat.
Exactly.
So once you get too low in numbers, really hard to get those to come back. And I mean, the decision on putting wipers in is well before I ever came here. What I read in the reports it was in response to white perch, or getting in here, but it sounds like there's some difference.
Though, because I think that the wipers were in the lake before the white perch were.
Definitely.
Because people got it in their head that when they would catch those white perch, everybody was so fond of the wipers being, they mistook those fish for wipers and stocked them in here, or white bass. The wipers were in here before the white perch.
Okay.
Anybody that fishes this lake can tell you that.
Might have mixed up my years on reading it, so.
The white perch got in there because people thought they were white bass.
That's right.
They were white. Dumped them in there.
So we need the lake to be healthy
Right.
with growth, correct?
Yep.
In order to keep the fish stocked correctly, right?
Yep, to keep desirable.
Okay. And the way to do that is not kill them off for 5 years, but that would look really nice in the lake, okay? But really, if you want fish and a nice lake, you need growth, and you need to clean the bottom of the lake to get that done,
Right.
correct?
Well,
And make it clear.
you need to increase the
Plants to
clarity. You need to get the nutrients
grow. Okay,
and the suspended solids.
all right, so
You
that's
drop
the
those out to
basic
get the
thing
clarity.
of this.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
So you improve the clarity, you get the vegetation growth, the fish
Right.
responds.
okay.
The dredging is
I mean,
one way
I'm
to
not
get at some
necessarily
of
saying
that.
the dredging, but how do you get the lake clear?
You know,
That's a very difficult problem.
you put a speed limit on it.
And so, as you mentioned, that it's clear in the spring and fall before the wind and waves turn it up. It's very shallow, so the wind and waves can really rip on it pretty
So if
darn
you
quick.
get the sediment off the bottom, that's going to lessen that chance of that stuff coming up and getting in the water, right? Making it less clear.
And, I mean, what we see on some other lakes is vegetation really slowing down that wind and wave energy. It's something rooted there, so it doesn't resuspend quite as
Okay,
quick.
so
but
then that
it's
would make
tough.
sense. We get some vegetation going and get some of the crap off the bottom of the lake and we're good. We stock it and we're good, right?
Wouldn't it make
Just in
sense
time.
to go north of Cedar Lake and start working on the drainage first, and then maybe set up a few retention ponds and things of that nature?
So with the stuff in the watershed, the local, or the county Natural Resource Conservation Service, the Farm Service Agency, Soil and Water Conservation District. They're the experts at working in the watershed and utilizing the farmers or other inputs to the water and getting good things on the landscape to have good water coming in. They're the experts, and they do a really good job in most locations, or try to do a good job, but it still relies on who owns that ground. And that's, if you have a very conservation-minded farmer, it can be very helpful, but there's a lot of other land use changes that we have here. I mean, we have a lot of development around this lake, and we've been getting a lot of heavy rain events, and if the silt fence around the development fails, that's putting a lot of nutrients and sediment in the lake really quick. Even the best practices, certain things can fail if we get some extreme weather events, and it's unfortunate, and how do you curb that or solve that? That's well beyond my thought process.
How about the dam? Is there been any talk about working on the dam? It's, right now, it's just a spillway. Right now, it's a spillway, that's all it is. Everything comes in, stays here until it gets high enough. There is a meter there for some reason, I don't know what that's for, but.
So within DNR, there's Division Water. They deal with all the dam and dam safety type of stuff. I try to stay out of that arena because that's a lot of engineering.
Does the boats, the size of the boats on the lake and their motor, does that have anything to do with?
Very likely. There are some studies in other locations that are looking at wakeboard boats, jet skis, ski boats, fishing boats, and the amount of waves that
If we made that an option for a couple of years, would that help?
I'm not going to comment on that one.
I'm just saying it would make sense, right?
So as an angler,
5 years and killing off everything in the lake, right? I mean, just say you can't have big boats right now.
so as an angler and fish biologist, I'm going to look at it differently than the whole lake perspective. If it were me, I mean, we wouldn't have anything big. We'd have little fishing boats, but that's not the world we live in, and not kind of what people want and desire for their lake community. So that's a big decision.
Different things.
So
you know what I'm saying? I mean,
and we're not in an area.
Fish kill ain't gonna happen, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, it just doesn't make.
Unless we get some changes on what's going on, likely not. I mean, if it's driven by local anglers, then that might be a change, but.
So the best option is to just stop the predators.
Increase a little bit of predator stocking, and a lot of the great ideas about trying to get the land use change, getting some spatter dock beds out there, and even trying to supplement some vegetation. What we've seen in some other locations is they'll put a fence around, like a snow fence in the water, and plant spatter dock or other vegetation in that area, and that can really help to jumpstart and get outside that area, because it's an area that's protected from any fish, as well as the wind and wave energy. I would after the dredging, because the dredging will keep it stirred up a little bit, but that's another potential idea to work at locally.
If you killed the fish, who would be responsible to pay for that?
It's a good question. So most of the in the past renovation projects that have been done, DNR has been the funder of the product as well as restocking. And at that price tag, and with where we're at on number of anglers that we have, it keeps dropping every year. That's a hard price tag to have.
It would be on the back of the town.
So, I mean, if the town wanted to fund the renovation, and if it was available, we would talk more about the process, but it's still likely not, it's not the best use of money.
Well, that doesn't mean you can't raise the money to make the lake healthy.
There's definitely things that can be done at a much smaller price tag that will benefit it. I mean, the root gnome treatment is a very short game. If you're looking at that long game, you're looking at land use changes in the watershed, around the lake with spatter duck beds, other vegetation beds, other ways to increase water clarity. That's a long game that's going to be a legacy for way going forward. How to get there, it's really hard.
They mentioned, a little bit earlier tonight, you had mentioned about having to shut off or stop any incoming fresh water based on species, plant, and everything else. Is that even possible based on the fact that we're just one cog in the wheel of this shed? I mean, it's coming through us, don't start with us.
Right, and so, like the renovation or plant stuff, yeah, it would be working well beyond it.
But I mean, as far as being able to stop anything coming in, can you actually ever say that you can't?
No.
Especially with the situation we're in, being in that north shed comes through us and keeps going south.
If you put a bubble over it like that's the only way you're gonna stop it. I mean, or keep all the boats and everything off. No, there are things that you can do, like
It's a
making sure your boat's
natural
cleaned off.
I mean, that's what we're dealing with, a natural.
Right.
We're not gonna have it look perfect.
Right, and if you want it perfect, you put it in a swimming pool.
Right.
So one last question.
Yeah.
How much of this problem is man-made?
There are definitely parts of it that are.
By how quiet everything went, I think I got my answer.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
There's definitely parts of it that are, some of it are, there are natural processes going on, but a lot of it is man-driven. So once man got on the landscape, started developing anything, cutting ice, putting any of that stuff is a change.
Yeah.
And how the environment
Really,
changes.
honestly, if you really look at this, if you just for a couple years said only fishing boats on this lake right now, just for a couple years, we could probably really get it back to where we wanted it.
Get tired of
For fish and for people voting, right?
It would change it. And
I mean, what?
in addition to like fishing boats, just if you put a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Right.
Well, let me clarify. With no wakeboard boats, because wakeboard boats can still throw a wake at 10 miles an hour. If you can reduce the wake, however that is, that will definitely change the lake.
And I mean, versus killing off the whole entire lake, and, you know, you can't have a fish in it or anything else, and it's a natural lake, that's ridiculous. You should just say, look, if everybody is on, you know, we need our lake back to where it needs to be naturally, can we just chill with the boats for a couple of years? That would be okay.
If we don't take that silt off the bottom, we could chill all we wanted to, that silt's gotta come off. We need about 4 feet of silt to shake down to a deeper depth in that lake. Dredging was an interesting idea, if we could dredge those three bowls where it could roll down into it, but I think it'd be faster if we used the chemical dredge. It'd be faster, we're not gonna get rid of solid dirt that eroded into it, but we are gonna get rid of leaves and dead vegetation and sawdust and things like that with that enzyme that might help us to get not 4 feet off the entire lake, but if we got 4 to 5 feet in those holes where it would roll off the shallow area and roll down into that deeper hole, we wouldn't get suspension. The suspension then wouldn't cause the water to warm up, we'd get sunlight penetration and weed growth. The weed growth would then solidify the bottom of the lake, which even cause less suspension. It'd be a better deal to try and get rid of some of that silt. The easiest way possible, dredging is not the easiest way, not in a lake that size. We hit them 3 holes, and let that water, let that silt fall down in, you know.
Oh, just
Shake down, and it's like a shake down into a deeper spot. But we get rid of the silt, and I'm talking about not the dredging that they're taking out, not the dirt, not the stuff that eroded into, we're not gonna get rid of that. Heck, I lost 20 feet of shoreline since I bought that property, 25 feet. It went someplace, it's in the lake, and it wasn't silt. It was shoreline. We get that silt off of there, and I think that chemical dredging would be the way to go, because I tested it, and I know it works. I tested it in Cedar Lake at my place, and it works.
Does anyone have any other big fish questions to the group? We'll be around for a little while, and you can come talk individually if you don't want to ask. Yes?
You said some places put snow fence in and put plants in there. Do you need a permit from the DNR to do that? Since it's staying on lake?
I don't believe so, but I would have to check on that. If that's something that you're interested in going in, let's talk further about that, and I'll make sure, and we'll talk about locations so it doesn't impact, because they have to talk to law enforcement as well, since that's going to be something in there. No one wants to be liable for running into it as well. But if that's something that's of interest, then let's definitely talk about it, because it could definitely be beneficial. So, something to try, and they're not that expensive.
Do you have any plans for upcoming stocking?
For cedar,
Yes.
it's wiper, it'll still be getting wipers.
Any channel cat or anything like that?
Doesn't need any channel caps. I mean, they're doing just fine.
No walleye stockings?
Not at this time.
What about, can't they go through like Wolf Lake does through Virgin America? I know they get their
Yeah.
walleyes through that.
Yeah, so we talked about getting a private stocking permit if the town or whomever wants to get together and work on getting a permit. I appreciate not having 10 different permits to look at, so kind of work together on pooling your money, because you're gonna get a better deal on fish as well. Even if you have bait shops, gas stations, just donation jars, that's what Perch America does as well, to get funding for the stocking. So that's definitely a possibility, especially for the walleyes, so you know about.
The timeframe, you have some stuff up on the slideshow, but if the kill hasn't started tomorrow, what would be the timeframe for how long the kill would take, how long restocking would take, and how soon they could start fishing again?
You can fish instantly, you're not gonna catch anything, but it'll take about 4 to 5 years before anything's up to a size being caught. So if we were to do the kill, it would be about September of this year. We put down that product, over the course of probably a week, because it's a lot of product, and the fish would float up over the next 2 weeks.
Who takes care of that?
The fish removal, that's nature. So most of the lakes that we've done these renovation projects on are not this urban. As you can probably imagine from the fish popping up, like the shad kills that periodically occur over the winter, they'll start smelling a little bit. This is everything. We don't collect them. You guys can collect them. You can't eat them. You can dispose of them, but we won't be out there. So going back to the original, it'd take about 2 weeks for those fish to pop up, and we would be looking at restocking in November.
When they did it in 1966, I mean, people were taking those fish and throwing them in their trunks. Were they eating them then?
Yeah, they're
The label has changed on what you can and can't do with those fish.
You can't even get the stuff right now.
Well, if we could, or if somehow there was a tanker full of it somewhere that came across, but hypothetically, yeah, back in the day, people ate those fish. Now, that is not according to the label. You cannot eat them. Technically, the rotenone really won't hurt you unless you eat a ton of fish. But it's more the secondary bacteria that comes on dead fish once they start dying. That's where you're going to get sick.
Do you know what they put in?
They put in rotenone at that time.
It was what you're considering now.
And back in the 50s, 60s, and even 70s, rotenone was a common thing to do. They would go out on rotenone lakes just because they saw something bad. It was very common at that time. Now it's with registration and laws, it's very uncommon.
There's something about putting alum in the lake after it's dredged. What would that do to the plant life?
What alum does is it locks up the phosphorus in the water, and it'll drop it out, so it should improve clarity, and at that stage, it should improve and get plant life.
Doesn't the way the rotenone work, doesn't it just go in and zap the oxygen? That's not how it works?
Nope, it binds to the gills of the fish.
Okay.
And so that it blocks the oxygen uptake on.
Okay, so it just blocks them from taking oxygen in, it doesn't wipe the oxygen out. So what happens with crayfish, the frogs, the turtles, the muskrats?
Muskrats are fine. Some of the studies that they've done, it's on the ingestion of the product, how much they have to drink, and they have to drink a lot to die from actually the product. So it only blocks stuff with gills, so tadpoles are not going to fare well. Crayfish, it's mixed on crayfish, what we see, but turtles, they do fine. They eat a lot of dead fish. They have a smorgasbord going on. But the other stuff that...
affect all the bald eagles?
That's right.
No, they have to eat a lot of fish to have any toxic impacts, so they're raccoons, eagles, osprey, a lot of those fish or things will help get all those dead fish out.
But if all the dead fish float and the eagles start eating them because they're right on the shore and they're abundant, we could lose one.
They would have to eat many times their body weight to have that rotenone concentration. So rotenone's been fairly well studied by American Fishery Society, they have a big publication on it, and what all has to, how much everything has to eat to actually die, and it's quite a bit. But there is potential, if they're eating that fish every day after day for many days, the potential there.
So people can't eat the fish and be all right, but the eagles can eat the fish and they'll be all right.
Because of so the people, it's because of the way the label's written. Back in the day, they used to eat them. But now, if that fish pops up, you see it pop up, it's pretty fresh, like you caught it hook and line. But if you don't see that fish pop up, and it's a nice one, they'll get secondary infections or not bacteria on them. And that's really what's the scary part with it. So, but eagles, I mean, they're adapted, they have different guts than we do, and so they eat different things. So I'm not gonna go out and eat a dead deer that's sitting by the road, but eagles sure do love that.
Why do we have pelicans here now on our lake, and they never used to be here before?
White perch.
White perch?
So, I mean, I've seen pelicans showing up in a lot of different spots in the past few years. I don't know what's different on their migration, but we're seeing a lot of pelicans on a lot of lakes, and some lakes are beneficial, eating a lot of undesirable fish on the lakes. I know those anglers would rather see them fly away.
Nick, did you get all your questions answered, or?
Yeah, I think you had mentioned 7 to 10 years.
7 to 10 years before it's decent fishing.
Yeah. Okay.
And we got Kevin Toth, are you here?
Yeah.
You wanna ask him about the alum treatment and,
Jim already did.
oh, you already asked him?
Yeah.
That, you know, if you re-dredge again in the future, that alum treatment will have to be applied to a landfill?
No, I had a question, if they apply the alum and they have to dredge later, and they're dredging alum now off the bottom, right, what happens with that? You say you don't know anything.
That's a good question.
Okay.
That I don't know. I have heard of alum treatments. I've never been part of one of them. I've read about them a bit, but I don't know about the dredge material. I've never come across that. So that's interesting.
So what do we have to do to not have these fish killed?
I mean, if we were to go through with a fish kill, we'd be having more meetings where the public comment would be part of that. Right now, with product not being available, we're not at that stage to have that public meeting and say yes or no on it. But right now, we're at a no, because, one, because the product's not there, and two, it's a low likelihood of success.
For example, the funding did become available somehow, would you be able to start this project without coming back to the town?
No chance. So back in the 60s, they probably did that rotenone treatment the year after they thought about it. The Willow Slough, not too far away, we did the renovation down there. We've been talking about that project for almost 10 years now. And we just did that treatment last fall. So if we are going down that road, you'll see many, many more people than myself in discussions on this. And we really need to have a better likelihood of success on doing it. I know it's been in our reports for many years that there should be a full lake fish kill. A lot of things have changed since that time. Our administration, cost, feasibility. So like I said, 60s, yeah, oh, it's running on it. Okay, next week they did it. Easy. Now it's not the case. We think a lot more and we want it successful.
You were talking about structure earlier, and I was just wondering, we do a Christmas tree thing here in town, and I take a bunch of trees down to some lakes in Fish in southern Illinois. They put them in every year, they put hundreds of Christmas trees in these lakes. What about here?
You can apply, get that permit to do them.
We got 150 every Christmas that we can use for structure.
And so, I mean, Christmas trees, they're a good habitat. They're not the best, but they're very available, very cheap, and very easy to work with. So they have some desirable advantages there. You can get a permit. Basically, the permit, you got to have that at least 6 feet under the water, so it's not a navigational hazard or somebody jumping out of the boat hitting their head. Beyond that, the permit comes through Division of Water, Division of Fish and Wildlife comments on it, and as long as you're putting them in halfway decent spots, there's not an issue there. And you can get that permit, I believe it's a year-long permit, and if you want information on that, we can I get your contact information and get that to you.
In your opinion, would it be beneficial?
It won't hurt. So the Christmas trees, they're even 150, you put those in piles, clumps the size of the chairs, it's gonna provide a spot for those fish to go and hide. The problem is they have to be below that 6-foot depth. Most of our panfish are spawning less than 6 feet. And same way with the spatter dock. If we had locations with people that were agreeable to some habitat, spatter dock, fallen trees, that type of stuff is really good for fish production, more so than the aggregation, which the Christmas trees often provide in deeper water. But they can be good, and really concentrate some of the prey fish for predators to get on.
If they did go ahead with the fish kill, what would be the possibility of beforehand, either netting or electrofishing these fish and holding, like these crappies or these bass or these walleyes in a rearing pond and put back into the lake?
It's one of the details that we've worked through during the process and figure out what we can, feasibly can and can't do. It's very possible, but like I said, that's a step way down the road of figuring out.
You even can get some stuff.
Yeah, so right now we're just looking at some different stuff, so, but, does anyone have any other fish questions? If not, feel free to come up and we can talk about anything else.
Thank you. You did a great job.
Thank you.